All right, Shalom Aleichem everyone. Welcome. We're starting a little bit later than usual. 8:40, not too much later. So tonight we post the title of the actual video online before we do the actual video. So in my mind, because there's been many questions that have come up throughout classes, lectures, your own contemplations, your own thinking process, I thought tonight we'll blend some of the Parsha in, but now focus on individual questions. Everything is on the table, everything is available, and we're going to hopefully take just a moment before we jump into all questions and think about one or two that maybe in your head for the last couple of weeks, couple of months, has been the question. It could be something based on the Parsha. It could be something that's not quite the Parsha, but related to our typical discussions. Or it could be something related to upcoming Moadim, the holidays, or even general life questions. And as usual, we'll try to frame everything within the vernacular and the concept of Kabbalah and Chassidut and give it some spiritual justice. So not just simply questions and answers, but God willing, per question, 5 or so minutes related to it, drawing from traditional sources, and we will, God willing, flesh it out and give it justice and give some depth to it and relate it back to the Torah model. So take a minute, let's take about maybe less, 30 seconds, and probe the inner recess of your imagination. Come up with a question that for you has been either an ongoing one or a recent one, or one you think is worthy of our contemplations tonight. So in 30 seconds we will continue, and let's see if we can create some colors here, a little different than the usual choreographed or pre-configured speech. Does everybody have a question? You ready to go? I love it. Go ahead.
A question came up. I have a son, 27.
Okay.
He grew up, let's say, he did go partly into like Judaism, let's say, when he was young. Then he moved away with his mom, and he's back here. But trying to get him to come back to a service or come to a lecture, let's say, he said, that's for you.
Right.
That's for me.
Right.
How do you get your son back into coming back into?
So I'm going to repeat the question. It's a great question, and it's one of the more sociological, challenging ones probably of the age. Somebody where the child came up with Judaism, and this, by the way, across the entire religious spectrum. I get this from Christians. I get this from everybody you can imagine who tried to conduct a traditional family, and they're having the exact same problem. Coming up with some measure of religious education, they have, basic terms are there. They move away for one reason or another. They come back, and now the affiliation is confined to cultural identity, their own kind of brand of it, or disinterest completely because it's no longer cool when dad does it, especially when dad does it. It's incredible how even with Baruch Hashem, my children going to one of the most expensive schools in the area, Yavne, with tremendously good education and great Rabbanon and great influences, and yet I can tell you that because of the culture, the instinct to rebel is very strong. And even amongst people where the rabbis are there, the structure is there, it should be a perfect environment to foster and grow religious sentimentality. That should be automatic for people, and yet it isn't. So even without having left, it can happen right here under your nose. So here's the question. How does one, as per the question you asked, how does one get somebody back in when the 18 to 25-year-old says, that's your thing, not mine? And as the father, the frustration is, oh, wait a second here, there's a Masorah. It's got to be your thing too, or there's no continuity. So how do you do it? With my organization, Da'ati, we've contemplated these things extensively because of the fact that we're up against that right now. Look at the class. Look at who's coming to the class. Do you see here 19 through 35? Right? Not many. Why? Because people typically think about these matters when they're older, more mature in thinking process. The young are distracted by technology. They're distracted by all kinds of sophistications that take them away from these thinking processes. So here's my answer to you. If it's cool, they will come. If Da'ati does a class, as an example, in Beverly Hills somewhere, away from every temple on Pico Boulevard and La Brea in Fairfax, completely divorced out of the idea that God is associated with an outdated institutional model that I have no relationship for whatsoever, and I don't care to. So again, the Torah's perspective is very simple. If you can't bring God to everyone, you're not doing it right. It's as simple as that. God isn't limited to the shul or to the minyan or to places that we are comfortable with. Those are high points and we treasure them. But where is Hashem found? Everywhere. So it's really the job of the educators to determine how to take a system, bring it to the people, and use a different approach than expecting to open up the doors in the morning and they come walking in for davening. It's not going to happen with the majority of the population. So the answer is, in all due respect to my love and appreciation for traditional customs and principles and practices, I think to get that crowd in, you have to think like that crowd thinks. This is actually modeled in the Torah. Who is the one who on his inside is one way, but he has no problem borrowing a garment or a look that looks to the outside very different? Who did that? The inside is one way, even so much that the father saw that, felt that, and said the very famous line, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, v'hayadayim yadei Esav, but the hands are the hands of Esav." Why? Because Rivka the mother, took the garments of Esav, gave them to Yaakov, he donned the garments, and now his father Yitzchak can discern, wait here, the voice is my son Yaakov, Hakol Kol Yaakov. But when I feel him, right, the feeling of him is Esav. Now here's the problem with this. We say about Jacob, Titain Emet Liyaakov, give truth to Jacob. Truth means you are true inside out. Tochu kivaro. So how could Jacob, the man of truth, become a trickster and now look like Esav and still be Jacob? Is he Jacob or Esav? Make up your mind. So the Mittler Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Chabad, wrote a very, very famous book called Biur Zohar, Clarifications on the Zohar. And there he explains that when it comes to clarifying or fixing some broken state, how do you fix it? There's two approaches. Linear, charge right in and drag the person into the proverbial sunlight. Or if they're resistant, he says, in a circuitous, roundabout way. Don't always approach linear. Find a different way to grab their attention and bring them in. And he says, some clarifications are around the back. If you can't get them from the front, which means for our purposes, conspicuous Judaism, talit, tefillin, shul, kashrut, the whole sociology of Judaism, up Pico Boulevard, if that does not work for them, find a method, find a garment that they can relate to, and then inculcate them through holy trickery. It's not a bad trickery. It's reverberating the archetype of them and then infusing that consciousness into them, but in a roundabout way. Because eventually, they will make an about face and show interest in traditional practices. But you can't do it by kicking and screaming and insisting and fighting. So to become Jacob on the inside and Esav on the outside is tricky because you can't then also become Esav. The trick is, if you're going to look like the outside, you can't become the outside. One more thing about this, in Pirkei Avot, we say, which is a phrase section in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, it says, do not associate with a wicked neighbor. The Lubavitch Rebbe asked the question, on the contrary, if the neighbor is wicked, should you not make the effort to A, associate with him, and B, mikarev, bring him in? What's it mean, disassociate? It's like abandoning your brother in his hour of need. So how can you say, avoid him, abandon him? So the Rebbe explains, it's a genius insight. He says, if you assess that by getting involved with the neighbor who's not practicing your way, if you assess that his Achilles heel is your Achilles heel, you share the same weakness, And you know through your own self-analysis, if I get involved with his problem, he may drag me down. I don't have the strength of character to grab him, pull him out, and bring him to the right side. It could be 2 people, God forbid, drown, not 1. Says the Rabbi, if you can't do the job properly, pull back, because somebody else better suited for the task will step in and assist him. But if you know inside, I have the ability, I have the talent, I can walk in, put on Esav's garments, but not become Esav, you're good. You can effectively makarev somebody in, take that spark, pull him back into the right fold, and do it in a way that he awakens without you, God forbid, diminishing your own quality. That's the idea. Yes, please.
I can't believe that Judaism is the truth because God allowed the Holocaust to happen, and we thank God that we escaped Egypt, and yet the Holocaust happened. I can't overlook that. God will not help us.
We don't have to overlook it. We can basically hold God accountable for it. You know, one of the best thing about Judaism is we don't have to deny a reality to embrace another. I can say, for example, that based upon 2 factors, this is actually an anthropological certainty. When I was back about 23, 24 years old, I was taking a cultural anthropology class. And my particular professor happened to be a PhD in the statistical probability of certain societies lasting for 1,000 years. And they take into account natural resources, threat of attack, and other factors. So here's what actually happened. I was sitting in class, and he said to me, you saw the kippah, saw the decorations. He said, do you know why I believe in Judaism? And I believe in God. I said, okay, he's not Jewish. I said, why? He said, because as an anthropologist, I can tell you, it's an anthropological impossibility that you're here. He says, understand something. The greatest empires in the world, Egypt, Rome, Greece, Media, even Spain, Nazi Germany, major empires, gone. Yet a people who are so tiny in proportion to the rest of civilization, you're here, but you're not here like the Aborigines. The Aborigines are in the outback somewhere protected by the country's laws, Australia's laws. You are in front of everything, on top of everything, even so much so that it drew the attention of famous atheist Richard Dawkins, who said it is statistically mesmerizing that these people have the amount of Nobel Prizes they actually have. So when you ask the question about God and Judaism being the truth or not, you have to assess that it's not just about one event. If you only look at the Holocaust, then yes, we're all going to have that same emotional feeling. You have to look at the whole of Jewish history and make an assessment. If you're going to look at the bad, you have to counteract that with the good. You have to look at both. And if you look from generation to generation, the fact we're here in our own country, on top, with all that we've accomplished, is nothing short of a miracle. So the Holocaust phenomena is something that we all demand the answer for. But one thing I can definitely tell you with certainty is, right after the ashes of the Holocaust scattered, and here we are a broken people, in a very short period of time, if not almost immediately, we reacquired our ancestral homeland that was not ours for more than 2,000 years. So even though one part was tragic, in light of the famous Hasidic teaching that the greater the darkness, the greater the light to come out of it, we saw then tremendous light. Not to mention many miracles in the Holocaust that actually did transpire. So we have to always try to assess things with a broader point of view than just fixating on one. Because similar to marriage, if someone says to me, Rabbi, I don't like my spouse. Now, what they're often looking for is validation from my perspective that they're right. You should not like your spouse. And you know what I say to them every single time? I'll always ask them before anything negative comes out, tell me 5 good things about your spouse. And often they do this, they do that. Well, they can't be that bad. So short of a bad crime or something you really cannot forgive, are you assessing all of them? Or are you fixated on one thing that maybe is not sitting well with you, but you're judging the whole thing by one thing versus everything the person is, then making a better assessment as to who they are. So guess what? We're in a relationship with God, right? We are referred to in the Torah as groom and bride. So if our groom did something or allowed something that we don't like, okay, we have the right to say, this is horrible for us. But if we judge the whole of Judaism on one thing, and we don't look at all of the good points across millenniums of time, then we're being disingenuous. Our perspective is too myopic, it's too narrow. Does that make sense? So we have to, it's okay to say, I want an answer for this, and we're taught that in Mashiach's time we'll have answers for that. But until then, just know in the heart of hearts that if I look at everything, there's a lot more good there than bad.
I like your answer, but, if we pray, God is not going to reward us. If we follow Jewish law, He may not reward us.
Well, first of all, the Rebbe was once asked the question, I forgot the individual's name, it's someone living in the valley. Once asked the question, why is Judaism so detail-oriented? I was going for my rabbinical degree, as you put it, my smicha. I remember going through not just a detail, going through pages and pages and pages of analysis of a single thing. And so somebody rightfully asked the Rebbe, why so many details? Keep it general, beklal, right? I love you, you love me, let's have a relationship. And so the Rebbe said to this man, I don't understand the question. Now it's actually in the answer. He said to him, if you think God needs this, then you don't understand what you're even asking. The details and all the things that we do, rituals and otherwise, is the reward. Why? When a person lives a life of diligence and practice, and they really practice a spiritual existence, and they elevate their mundane faculties to a higher level of consciousness. And now they have an internal rewiring of sorts, like a recalibration, where they can feel God and connect to God and be one with God and walk a godly path. That's the reward in and of itself. So the Rebbe explained, don't look for the reward. Understand that everything given to you is not for God's purposes, it's for your purposes. It fine-tunes the human to make him or her a vehicle to express and experience godliness. And we say it in the Torah. We say, you will build for me a temple, I will dwell in them. The goal is not the temple. The temple is easy. The goal is in each and every one of them. So rather than look for a reward of the future, which is also guaranteed to us, our sages say in Masechet Kedushin, Sachar ba'olam hazeh lecha. The reward of this world is nothing. Whatever you're looking for, compared to the real experience, which is bonding to the Creator. That experience alone is everything. That's the privilege. I get to walk down the street every day knowing that my eyes, my ears, nose, mouth, hands, and feet are sanctified because I walk on a path of discipline, of focus, and of spiritual enrichment. That is the reward. Right there. Okay, thank you for your questions. Yes?
A couple of weeks ago, you were talking about 3 cycles of Moshe Rabbeinu's life.
Yes.
40, 40, 40. So could you please explain what is and why is it 40? Is there any connection?
Yes, the question was with the cycles of Moses. We know that Moses, according to the Medrash, had a beautiful multidimensional existence. 40 years, he was prince of Egypt, right? King of a foreign land. 40 years, actual king of Ethiopia. And the last 40 years, king of Israel. So in actuality, when you think about Moses, as we said before, and you think about the burning bush, the sneh, people often associate that image of a young man going before the burning bush and having a dialogue with God. It could not be more wrong. He was 80 years old. His mission began as a shliach for the Jewish people at 80 years old. He was a very busy person. 40 years under Pharaoh, 40 years in Ethiopia, 40 years in Israel. So the answer is, wherever righteous people are sent, this is a big theme, by the way, that the Rebbe talks about. When you talk about somebody being sent on a mission, what do we call it in Hebrew? Yeah, and call him a shliach, right? So what is a shliach? A shliach is somebody who's an extension of the king, is an extension of a higher concept. His mission is bring it to people, right? Be that person, bring the message out. So the Rebbe explains, if you look at the word shaliach, there's a yud in that word. Shin Lamid Yud Chet, Shaliach. What does the Yud stand for? We know already from Kabbalah and Hasidut, every neshama is gifted 10 faculties. 3 of them are intellectual, 3 of them are emotive, 3 are instinctive, and 1 is speech and action, which are 2 parts of one concept. So again, 3 intellectual properties called Chabad, Chachma, Bina, and Da'at. 3 emotive properties called Chagat, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet. 3 called Nahi, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut is speech and action. You have all 10, which means everything you need to fulfill the mission you have. So what's lacking? The actualization of that potential. The Shliach is given this. He takes his abilities. If he brings them out through hard work, and he brings out from his mind down to his feet, all of him to the mission, then says the Rabbi, he brings out 1 more Yud. There's the Yud you see, Shin Lamed Yud Chet, and another Yud comes out because just having potential isn't very praiseworthy, right? It's like someone who's a son or a daughter of an Olympic athlete bragging that they actually have Olympic genes. Well, that's great, except what did you do? Have you tried doing it? If the answer is no, then you're riding upon the accomplishments of other people. So, says the Rebbe, if we take the numerical value of the word Shaliach, Shin Lamed Yud Chet, 348. But if we add 1 more Yud, meaning the 10 that you bring out via your efforts, it's now 358, which is exactly Mashiach, equals Mashiach. So the messianic ability in every person is the power to actualize their latent potential to be a vehicle for God. That's the shlichut that we're talking about. When these people go on their shlichut to different lands, as we see today, they're all over the place. Every land one may go, one is literally preparing that land for what's going to be in the future. So the interaction of Moshe Rabbeinu in Egypt, then in Ethiopia, then finally with the Jewish people, all the places he traversed with his level of shlichut, so just even before the burning bush, who he was, the footsteps alone are changing the environment. One of the biggest ideas in Kabbalah is that when a person walks down the street, this is a very deep thing we can't get into too much, but the movements of the feet along the ground are elevating divine sparks out of the ground. So it says in the Talmud Tractate Chagiga and Perek Aleph, it says that when 2 sages were about to go on a mission together, it says Shakle va'azle, that the 2 sages, it's called Shakle va'azle, they calmed and they went. So what does that mean? The Shakle means that they first acquired their mind, Shikul hada'at. They calmed the mind, they focused on something godly, then va'azle they went. The Arizal comes and says, as they go in that mindset, the feet alone, walking on the ground, elevate divine sparks out of the ground. In other words, everywhere somebody righteous may walk, whatever lands they travel to, is for the purpose of elevating these fragments of divine potential and revealing the fullness of their splendor. And later on we know how important Ethiopia has been for the Jewish people, even up to the current day, right? The exodus of Jews back into the land of Israel. Talking about even Queen of Sheba, we have even, by many reports, Moshe Rabbeinu's own wife, and you have Tzipporah. There's a lot of discussion about how that land, if you go even deeper than that, who owns Ethiopia? Go way back, way back. Who is the proprietor over Ethiopia and the whole of Africa? Okay, and go earlier. Go before Abraham, 10 generations back to Noach. Cush, and his father is Ham. Remember the 3 sons of Noah, right? Shem, Ham, and Yafat. These 3 each took 1/3 of the world. So Shem, Asia Minor. If you look, for example, Shem is of course the whole land of Israel. If you look, for example, at Ham, whose name is Het, Africa, right? Yafat is Greece. His direct descendant is Yavan. So what's it mean that Ethiopia, who belongs to the fallen son of Noach, of whom Noach himself even said, cursed will be Canaan and their descendants. You go to look at the land of Ethiopia in the greater continent of Africa, you talk about a very long history of slavery, of brutality, of violence. So the nature of Torah is, and we've said this before, Torah's mission is not to be confined to the high places of Eretz HaKodesh, Tzfat and Tiberia and Yerushalayim. Where's Torah's ultimate trajectory? Where's it trying to go? Yeah, all the way to the desert, to the deepest, darkest regions, including Ethiopia, to go into the heart of Africa itself and to elevate the entirety of that continent. So that's why someone like Moshe Rabbeinu becomes king over an area that really is not under Jewish rule. We come from Shem. 10 generations from Shem is Avraham Avinu. So here we are, Moshe Rabbeinu the Redeemer, spending 40 years of his life walking about the territory that is the complete antithesis of who he is, to elevate those sparks out of the lowest level to bring it to the highest. So those kinds of themes are why he's first in Egypt, then in Ethiopia, and then finally in the land of Israel. It's a progressive movement toward light from darkness.
What is 40?
40 is a transitional number. Everything in the Torah that deals with the transitions connected to the idea of 40. That's why you have, for example, ideally in the womb, 40 weeks. Why? 40 is the concept of transition from potential to actual. Right? A mikvah, 40 seahs of water. You go into an actual mikvah, what happens? He converts from tameh to tahor. Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Getting the Torah, welcoming in a whole new era where heaven and earth will connect, unlike anything for the previous 2,000 years. 40 days and 40 nights. Vayihi sham arba'im yom arba'im laila. Many of the 40s in the Torah are conversion, even the flood of Noah, right? So you had 40 days and 40 nights of rain. It was a mikvah, conversion of a land of impurity to a land of purity, right? Changing the earth from what it was to what it has to be, chaos to order. So the 40 is representative of conversions from one state to another. First Egypt, then Ethiopia, and finally the Jewish people. Yes?
I know a couple of laws are no sorcery and no contacting the dead.
Yes.
So that means that could possibly be real.
Mm-hmm.
And does it happen where that could really, having like a spirit, will talk to you or?
Sure. And in fact, in the Talmud, in Chagiga, again in the first parak, they talk about when King Shaul had spoken to a certain necromancer who resurrected, it's actually Shmuel, right, that Shaul had the necromancer elevate a prophet out from the other world. So we see this actually happening, this divining technique actually happening in the Torah itself. So there is power to it, not that all people who practice it are the real thing, obviously, but the fact that the abilities exist, even in this week's Parsha, talking about all the various kinds of magical practices and manipulative practices that are forbidden. In fact, we even say in this week's Parsha, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. So what does the word Tamim refer to? Yeah, like Yaakov. Ish tam yoshevo halim. Tamim is being simple. Not that you are simple. Conduct yourself in a simple, pure, faith-based way. Okay, the Ramban comes and says that is actually a prohibition against going into all kinds of magical practices and trying to use techniques to achieve certain levels of advanced knowledge that you shouldn't be privy to. If you're truly tamim, it means you conduct yourself in a way that's simple. You don't look for divining techniques in other ways. So yeah, there is power to them.
So if somebody broke these laws and didn't know about it, does Orthodox Judaism believe that exorcism can be done on a person?
Yes, in fact, one of the most famous exorcists of the last 150 years is a student of the Ben Ish Chai of Baghdad, Rabbi Yehuda Fataya, who wrote many discussions about the difference between psychiatric disorders and it's a difference. Exorcism is one thing, and if it's a mental health issue, or it even looks like a possession or an intrusion of sorts, it's hard to tell. Sometimes, the person is behaving in a way that makes differentiation difficult. He happened to be at a level where he practiced this often. And in his famous book called Minchat Yehuda, He documents many of the exorcisms that he performed and goes into great detail about the differences between a mental health disorder and a legitimate, actual, bona fide possession.
What's the name of this book?
Minchat Yehuda, and it is available actually in English
And
recently.
there are people today that will do exorcism.
I don't know if so much today, but it's a rare breed of person. If somebody has a question about a certain mindset or a state of being, they have to consult somebody at the appropriate level to determine if such a concern is even legitimate. It may be that they think something's there, but it isn't. It could be something very, very simple and subtle. The Rabbi very often would say, change the mezuzah, look in your tefillin, examine this. There are things that can create a disturbance in a person's center, even if it isn't something as spectacular as exorcism.
Using like a Ouija board several times.
Forbidden. No, the key words you said is not knowing. And by Jewish law, anything that's in the realm of not knowing, called bishogeg, when a person corrects the problem, is forgiven immediately. These aren't things that stay with you forever. There's not an eternal sentence. So could it cause a problem? It could. Is it likely it did? No. More than likely, it's more of a psychological state of either being overly worried or anxious. Legitimate things like this take a very careful discernment process. It's not so simple. And that's why, again, one of the leading students, in fact, just a little segue to this, that Rabbi Yehuda Fataya, the same rabbi who talked about this, he's very famous because during World War II, the Nazis were coming up through Africa, trying to invade the land of Israel. And this is actually in the paper in Israel. It's actually documented. Rabbi Yehuda Fataya at that time, he said to one of the British, take me up on a plane and I'm going to perform a certain kapara involving the killing of a chicken and blood, and a ritual that he was privy to from Kabbalah Ma'asit, the more esoteric world of practical Kabbalah. And they brought him up, and he did the ritual, and they sprinkled the blood in a certain geometry around the land, and he said to the soldiers who were fighting against the Nazis, you stand in the actual circle, and you do not step out, and you will be victorious. Even though I think, according to what I remember, they were far outnumbered. And every one of the enemies fell. It was such a miracle, they recorded it in the paper, and to this day, it's in the archives. So Rabbi Yehuda Fataya is a very unique individual. But that level of person that can discern such matters is a rare breed in general. So only somebody of that quality can make those kinds of discernments. Okay, how about this side? Yes?
What is the number 49 levels of the Jewish people? They were in the desert and they said they went in the Tumah. What is the 49?
49 in terms of the counting of the Omer from the second night of Pesach.
They said they were so in
Oh, right.
that it was
Yes.
49 today. If it was one more, it's going to be 50. And
Question is, what is the meaning of these 49 levels that we talk about regarding Egypt? That the people had fallen 49 levels of impurity. And had they gone one more step, God forbid, it would have been the end of their identity. So first of all, when you say regarding impurity, sha'ar nun, right, of tuma, right, that last level that we're talking about. If you fall, God forbid, to that level, it means that your entire conscious sense of identity is gone. Now, 49 levels of descent, then the counting of the Omer is now 49 levels of ascent, going from Egypt all the way to the Har Sinai in the revelation of the Torah. So 49, according to our tradition, we say in Masechet Rosh Hashanah that there are 50 gates of comprehension. In total, there are 50 levels of comprehension. Each gate, each sha'ar, is a whole different way of looking at reality. So we say that Moshe Rabbeinu acquired 49 of them. The one gate that eluded him was the 50th, Sha'ar Nun. Now our sages tell us that upon the passing of Moshe Rabbeinu, when he passed from the world, he achieved the 50th gate, called the wondrous face of God. At that level, says the Mittler Rebbe in Shari Yichud, it's called the Keter of Bina, you so understand the nature of a thing that you no longer require any more explanation or commentary to grasp it. So Moshe Rabbeinu himself, being the leader of the people, what was his one and only desire? to know God, right? Show me your face. So in wanting to know God, he acquired 49 levels of comprehension, but the actual knowing of God as an indistinguishable thing eluded him. As Hashem himself even said, no being, no mortal being can know my face and live as a soul in a body. To know me as absolute means that the boundaries of this world no longer exist. They're null and void. And the mission is to be a soul in a body carrying out one's mission. So just like there are 50 gates of comprehension, and Moshe acquired the 50th at the moment of his passing, so too, Zelu Umadzeh, there are 50 gates of the opposite. 50 gates of impurity, impure levels of comprehension, all the way down to the 50th, which would be then absolute. So that's why there's the 50. Now I will say one thing very quickly, that the 49 gates themselves, the counting of the Yomer, the greatest trait that one can ever have, according to our sages, is a good heart. Right? Lev Tov. And Lev Tov equals 49. So the ultimate attainment of Bina, if you would, the ultimate sense of Bina is simultaneously a good and refined character. That's one of the assessment points. So yes, coming out of Egypt, if you went down into unfathomable levels of impurity and experiences, you have to climb up. And how do you do that? Acquire the good heart. So that's where that magic number comes from, which relates also to this month as well. Hold on. Yes?
Can you give us a little bit of the Allah Shotim part, just a little main points?
Yeah, actually relates to this entire concept. So as the Parsha itself begins, it starts, Shotim v'shotrim titein lecha b'chol she'arecha. Judges, police, you will put in all of your gates. Asher Hashem Elokecha, that God your God gives to your tribes. And it ends by saying, and you will judge the people mishpat tzedek, with righteous judgment. So here's the question. When it comes to the actual parsha of the week, we'll make it succinct. Everything relates to the time that you're in. And right now we're in the time of Elul, and the theme of Teshuvah, and changing our course and trying to acquire the better version of ourselves. So for the month of Elul, the main theme is Teshuvah. Every parsha, hence, that is involved in this month directly connects to the idea of Teshuvah on a personal, individual level. So we need to ask the question, what does it mean? Judges and police you will put in all of your gates. Practically, it makes sense, right? On a practical, sociological level, if I have a city, or I have a certain defined area, I need to have law enforcement and judges and protectors, unless, God forbid, somebody attacks, or there's criminal behavior inside the city. There has to be regulators of law. But what does it mean on a personal level? So right away, we say that, based upon the Bnei Yisachar, one of the great Hasidic masters, in his book called Igur de Kala, he says, as the Kohen Tzedek has pointed out, that would the verse have been limited to the idea of the city's gates, it should have said, Shoftim v'shotrim titein lecha b'chol sha'arechem. But it doesn't say that. It says, judges and police you'll put b'sha'arecha, in your gates individually. Now, Shlomo HaMelech, in one of his books called Kohelet is the name of the book that we read often during Sukkot, that contemplates the vanities of the world. And the first verse starts, vanity of vanities, Amar Kohelet, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That's the opening verse. So here's the king, with all of his incredible wealth of horses and money, etc., who's telling us, with all of those acquisitions, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So the Medrash comes and says, how many vanities are in the verse? Vanity is one, vanities in the plural, according to the rabbinical principle, mi'ut rabim shnayim. An unspecified plural means two. So vanity of vanities, says Kohelet, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. 7 vanities in total. 7 in total. Now, one of the great questions that's actually asked is how astrology affects the Jewish people. So we know that, of course, when we talk about the idea of the natural world, we are often the target of or the outcoming of forces that are environmental and otherwise that impact us. Right? The whole modern study of epigenetics looks at how the environment affects genetic expression. So on a very simple level, do planets and astrological configurations affect the Jewish people? Now, before you answer quickly no, we have entire books about this topic. The Bnei Yisachar has one. The Tzvilat Tzaddik has one. In Sha'ar Yisachar there's one. And the origin, the Sefer Yetzirah of Abraham, is all about how every month has a certain sign and a certain letter and a certain limb and a certain sense. So the astrology principle is very entrenched in Jewish practice. So does it have an effect on the Jew's psyche and destiny? So in very much a short answer, yes and no, depending upon the person. We're taught according to our tradition, if you're standing on Earth, there are 5 planets visible to the naked eye. From Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, there are specific planets that we can see. Mars. The 2 major factors in part of charting a person's destiny is also position of sun and moon. Right? The Shemesh and the Uriach. And then we have the 12 signs of the zodiac. So our sages tell us, if you examine the letters that correspond to these ideas, if you have 5 planets that factor into the concept, 5 is the He. 2 luminaries, sun and moon, 2 is the Bet. And 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12th letter of the alphabet, is Lamed. So what is He, Vet, Lamed? It's Hevel, vanity. So says, in terms of our writings, when a person allows vanity to enter into their consciousness, they become susceptible to the mazalot. Now, the limitations put upon you by your birth sign, by other factors, these become now prisons because if he goes by the way of the natural order, now he's susceptible to natural law. But if he's Torah-oriented, very famous teaching in the Talmud in Nida, Avraham Avinu, Abraham said, looking at his forecast, he said very famously, I've charted my stars and I can see I'm not meant to have children. My planet Sedek, Jupiter, is in the wrong position in the sky. It's a famous Agada in Masechet Nida. So what's Hashem say to him? Lift yourself above the stars. You and your Toldot, your offspring, are not of stars. So now we have a problem. Are we of the stars or are we not of the stars? So the answer is, depends upon the person's psyche. If they're living by natural law, under natural order, by definition, you have that influence. If through Torah you transcend the natural imperative and you rise above it, then it no longer has an effect on you at all. Now, looking at the Parsha of the week, we just said that there's 2 things. Judges and police, you have to put in all of your gates. So what are your gates, as the Kohen pointed out? What are your gates?
Ears, eyes, and nose.
Yes. So if you count the gates of the head, there are exactly 7 gates. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and 1 mouth. 7 in total. Why 7? Because the 7 of the portals of the face either relate to the 7 vanities of Kohelet, or, as our sages say, Kol Sheva Chashuv. Every 7 is important. The Shabbat, 7th day of the week. Moshe Rabbeinu, going back to Moses, is the 7th generation from Avraham Avinu. 7s throughout the Torah are always sanctified. The Shemitah is the 7th year. The Yovel, the 50th year of the Jubilee, is 7 times 7 plus 1. Sukkot, right? You have 7 there on multiple levels. The Hoshana, right? You have, of course, the Lulav and the Etrog, 3 Hadas, 2 Arva, 7 in total. You shake it to 6 directions and bring it back to the 7th. These 7s repeat themselves all through Torah. So it's either a number of vanity or a number of sanctity. So here comes the gates of a person, and now we are in the month of Elul, and our mission is to become the better version of ourselves, to go from the Hevel of the world to the Hevel of the Torah. Just to note parenthetically, the Torah itself is a good hevel. How many books in the Torah? The books of Moses? 5. That's the Hey of hevel. Okay? How does that Torah begin? What letter? Bet. That's the Vet of hevel. What's the last letter of the Torah? The Lamed of Israel. So the word vanity either is hinting at the whole order of natural phenomena, or the hevel, the breath of Torah itself. So now we come to the ultimate secret of the verse and how it relates to the month of Elul. Here you are in the month of Elul. You're trying to undergo the becoming of the best version of yourself. How do we do that? We recognize there are 2 forces always at play. There's the vanity of the world, the gates of the head, looking at the wrong things, listening to the wrong things, use of smell, taste, touch, etc., all in the wrong ways. Then there's the godliness of the world. Now, between those two, which one is the more disciplined path? The vanities or the sanctity? The sanctity. The vanity is everywhere. As our sages say, the shell precedes the fruit. If you're looking for vanity, it's everywhere. And it's easy. It's quick. It's accessible. You want holiness, you have to dig and dig and dig and scrutinize to find those sparks in between things. So now comes the parsha. It says to us, Shoftim v'shotrim. You will take judges and police. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says, quoting another area in Devarim, what do the police do? Citing Rashi, citing a few Rashis. The police run after you and make sure that the law decided by the court is enforced. They do kafiyah, they pressure you in order to fulfill what you have to do. So says the Bnei Yissachar, this is the meaning of the verse. You have to first take judges. Now when a person recommits themselves to spiritual practices, who is the judge that you have to have? Yourself. Your own mind. If you learn the Torah and you learn these principles, you have to use the information here to judge the condition of every stimuli that may come in your eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. You have to judge those things. Appropriate or not. Then you have the shotrim. You have the policeman. What does that mean? Well, you come to a lecture like this. You're sitting here. You hear information. But when you walk out in the parking lot and beyond, are you taking the information with you and continuing that process? If a person feels only in certain environments a sense of awe and reverence, when he walks out into the general domain, he loses it. It's no longer weighing heavy on his consciousness. Then the continuity is impossible. There'll be no continuity. So the policeman means when you walk out into the general world, you have to make sure everything that your judge has decided, be like this, not like this, do that, don't do that. Now your policemen have to antagonize you continuously. You have to make sure in every possible environment you are literally connected to the ideas of what the judge wants. So shoftim v'shotrim, you will put in all of your gates. Which gates? Eyes, ears, nose, mouth. And you will take those gates, and remember always, there's 2 ways your 7 gates can go. Either toward the 7 vanities of the book of Kohelet, toward the vanity of the whole astrology and the mazalot and the kochavim and natural law, or it can go toward the sanctity of 7, like the Shabbat, like the Shemitah, etc. We have to, now to do that, you have to judge. That's actually, by the way, we say in the beginning of the splitting of the Yam Suf. Every day when we do the Shir Hayam, the first word is Az. Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael. What is the word Az? It's explained to mean Aleph, which according to the Gemara and Shabbat is Aleph Chachma, Aleph Bina, the mind, and it's over which letter? The Zion, which are the 7. So the whole idea of Az is that the mind, Moach, Sholet al Halev, it takes the whole of his natural self and directs it according to the principles of sanctity and holiness. That's what that mission is. So now, to give one more clue to this, the first 2 words, Shoftim v'Shotrim, police and their judges that are together, if one were to take the numerical value of Shoftim v'Shotrim, judges and police. It exactly equals 2 times ayin, 2 times ozen, 2 times nachor, the nostrils, mouth, peh, and 2 times yad, the 2 hands, with the addition of El Hashem, to Hashem. So the meaning of Shoftim V'Shotrim is your 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, 1 mouth, 2 hands, the totality of you has to be to Hashem. And how will you do that? Having a good and proper judge and a proper authority to reinforce the law. Your own conscience being sholet on you, weighing on you. Okay, so that's how we understand the Parsha. Just to make one more mention of something, just to see I'm not making this all up and inventing things as I go along. If you look at the first actual verse itself, listen to how the verse continues. It says, you will put in all of your gates, Asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha lishvettecha v'shaftu et ha'am. So it says, God your God gives this to your tribes. And it says, v'shaftu et ha'am, you will judge the people, mishpat tzedek. So the letters, the actual letters, if you examine, of lecha, lishvettecha, v'shaftu et. You to your tribes, and you will judge the. The acronym of that is the month Elul. To say this is the Parsha where when you talk about renewing the idea of the righteous mind, controlling and policing one's senses, to bring in sanctity, not the opposite, this is the month that we focus on these matters. Mostly. Yes?
So there's a law when a Jewish person dies, somebody's supposed to wash the body for the first 24 hours.
Chevra Kadisha.
Their soul, the dead person's soul was supposed to be above. Is that because they think an evil spirit could snatch the soul or something like that?
No, it's actually the opposite, because when somebody passes away from the world, so the question was, why do we have this concept and principle that there's a 24-hour guarding of the body by individuals who are there to watch and make sure nothing that's unsanctified happens? Why do we have this? What's the reason for it? So the Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, until the actual moment of burial, the soul is still there. And the soul is watching and experiencing all that's happening around it. Why? When you think about people who go through life, many people don't know to what depth they were appreciated or what impact they made on their fellow man. So most of us will never know, ever, how far our good went. You may see 1 step, 2 steps, sometimes 3 steps. Sometimes if you're a famous person, you get letters, you get information, but you'll never really know how far that went. So we're taught that when it comes to these individuals, when a person's soul's present, it's not because we have a concern about an evil spirit snatching the body, but rather we're more concerned that the individual who's present and still with us will have an actual last moment to see, especially when you have the Hefsed, you have the Lamentations, and people who will speak about them, the eulogies. They get to actually see and experience all of the good that they did in the course of their life and now have a real sense of how impactful it was, how far-reaching it was, and how far their actual goodness has traveled and affected others.
So the dead person can hear and see the funeral?
Yes,
And
very clearly.
I also read that when you're leaving a funeral, you have to, on the very outside, right when you're leaving the cemetery, you have to ritually wash your hands,
Yes.
or an evil spirit can come home with you.
It's not so much that, it's more the idea, when they talk about the idea of what's called a ruach ra'ah, a bad spirit, it also means a state of impurity. So as an example, when you wake up every morning after you sleep, we talk about a ruach ra'ah on the hands. Why? Our sages tell us that sleep is 1/60th of death, because you're unconscious. You're not conscious of what's happening around you. So in a state of impurity, the idea is that when you wash with the hands in a proper ritualistic fashion, you're converting the unconscious state of sleep into the conscious state of being awake and alert with all of your faculties intact. So it's more about the idea of what's called tuma, impurity, versus simply other entities roaming around. There is that, we talk a lot about that, but for today's time, we talk more about the idea of ritual states of purity versus impurity and how it affects ultimately the psyche. Okay, so I think let's go one more question, and then we will wrap it up. Yes, Roshi?
It's very interesting. Every time you want to refer to the Torah, the book, you just open it and you find it.
Habit. Well, I would tell you that because I'm so smart that I memorized the whole book by heart. The truth is, though, in this edition, you can just turn and find the Parsha, and it's right there in front of you. So I just look for it, and it's there. I don't have the Vilna Gaon's ability to actually know the whole thing by heart at the age of 6 and recite it forwards and backwards and by heart. It's not quite my ability. Yes, but thank you for that. So if you take the lesson from tonight and the idea of guarding the senses and changing course, think of it like this. Our sages tell us that for every sense you were given, every gate that you were given a shield. You can determine to open the gate or close the gate. If I see a certain vanity unfolding in front of me, let's say I'm looking at something immodest, I can choose. Either I fixate on it and bring that thing in, and now it becomes a permanent part of my active mind and imagination and mental faculties and then filters to the rest, or I close the gate, and being a good judge here, a good shofet, I say, okay, I'm trying to change my habit of looking at these things to make room for converting the vanity of the natural world into the hevel of the Torah. Same thing with, of course, the ears. Unfortunately, we have a society where lashon hara and rachilut, evil talk, thrive. So if I'm privy to a conversation in this month of Elul, where I know the nature of the topic is talking about somebody else, I'm again trying to purify the sense of sound, I have the option to either stay there and listen, or, you can take the tragus and block the ear, or simply just walk away. So if you take one avoda for Elul, a person can go ahead and take the judge of the mind of proper conduct, take the police that you enforce it, all matters of the day, every environment that you're in, and then you're very conscious that when you look at something, hear something, smell something, eat something, or you're about to say something, that you scrutinize the integrity of that choice. Do I want to do this now to invite something in, or am I attaching myself to ways of the past that I'm best left, I can leave them behind and move on to a better future? So that's why, even though there's many levels of the avoda to Elul that our sages talk about, that's the one that I would say in terms of a practical guide for teshuvah, it's reconditioning the senses. I'll add one more thing to that. We know, everybody here knows that there was a name change in the Torah. The first time a name actually changed is Avram becoming Avraham. So our sages asked the question, what is the significance of the hay that was put into his name? And our sages even say in the Gemara that such a change this was, that according to the wording of the Torah, it's actually a mitzvah lo ta'aseh. It's forbidden to ever call him again Avram. So what is Avraham? What does that refer to? So there's a verse that says, Rabot machshavot belev ish. We know this pasuk? Yatzat Hashem hi takum. Rabot machshavot belev ish. Many are the thoughts in the heart of a person. So why are they many? Because again, if your senses are not yet yours to direct, and all day you're being bombarded by new stimuli, so your thoughts are many. You're always thinking different things, and you're never really in a solid and consistent state. So says the Igor de Kala, the acronym of Rabot Machshavot Belev Ish is Avram, the first name. Now what about Avraham, the addition of the hay? So the Medrash writes, he was given the hay after the Brit Milah because now he was able to take the 5 senses, the hay, five senses, and sanctify even them. And the Medrash writes, these senses are normally controlling people. Avraham Avinu was able to control them. That's the extent to which he sanctified himself. And because of that, he was able to achieve all of the ma'alot. We'll end with one more thing, one more beautiful gematria that's brought in Aspakleria de Meira. It's a commentary to the Zohar, also brought by the Chida. If you take the name Avraham with the hay, and you spell each letter in full, milui, so Aleph, Aleph Lamed Pei, Bet, Bet Yud Tav, across each letter of Avraham, the resulting value of all of his letters, now with the hay added, is 1,118, which equals exactly Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So, to get to a level where a person is now conscious of God being one, it's a roadmap. If he takes the senses, disciplines them, trains himself to even physically chase after holy things and scrutinize and differentiate between the right way and the wrong way, using his shofet, his judge, and the policeman to enforce it, then he will achieve the acquiring of the hay. He can now take those senses, sanctify them, and more so become a vehicle to express and convey God's oneness. So that's the avoda, I would say, that for this month is probably the most challenging and the most rewarding. If you can go to Rosh Hashanah and say, wow, for the whole month, what I looked at, listened to, smelled, tasted, and spoke about were holy matters. If you can know that about yourself, what a great way to start the new year. So,
The five is referring to the higher sefirot or the lower sefirot?
the five of the hay, his senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. All five. That he took even those physical things that typically for most people they're controlled by, and he controlled them. He used them. That's the ma'alah of Avram to Avraham. From Rabot Machshavot B'Lev Ish to Avraham. God is one. It's difficult, but it can be done. Okay, thank you for coming tonight. Great questions. And we'll see you, God willing, next week. The month of Elul will continue and learn again. This is a thing we can all do. Think about the ideas tonight and apply them. Because everything we talk about should be applicable the next day when you wake up in the morning. Control the senses and know that teshuvah is not just simply a passive thing of waiting for a certain month to come when you feel inspired. Teshuvah is an active thing. And if you can make Elul about a combination of the king being in the field and arousal from the king, but your own individual effort, put those two together, you have hatzlacha. Then you have success. Okay, thank you for coming.